All right. Welcome, everybody, to another episode. I guess I can call it my political madness. I'm using that here some. Just it's a brand that I've developed many years ago. I've got a presence on pretty much every media platform. It's a nice little buzzword. I mean, when I was trying to figure out what to call what I was writing under, political madness just seemed to be the best. It's like, I don't know how to describe this. It's just complete insanity. I'd say things now are a little bit more big picture than that. It's not just political. We're talking about global, cultural, geopolitical, humanity-based issues that we're dealing with here, and that I'll be dealing with, in this video series. So, if you see political madness, yeah, there's some of that, but it's a larger issue. But I like using that phrase. Otherwise, it's just, I'm just like I pointed to before. Rick Mad. You can find a lot of my work at various platforms under Rick Mad. I probably even post more under that than I do any of the political madness profiles that I have as well on most of the social media platforms. And I'm bringing that up because today, what I want to go over is something that I wrote quite a while ago. And I wrote it on my, where is it? My blog. It's not loading right now. There we go. Political Madness. So I started this blog in 2010, and blogging was still, not as common as it is now. And I had a friend. We were going back and forth, and we were just, whenever our friends got together, her and I would just go into all the issues, and it was just like rah 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 rah, back and forth. And she looked at me one day and she goes, you should start a blog. And I was like, what's that? I'd heard of it, but never really thought about it. So anyway, long story short, started the blog. Political madness. It's real. It's happening, and it's crazy. All right, that doesn't even begin to describe what's going on in the world today. But at the time, and most of what I wrote, at least early on here, was pretty left-right narrative. I was still, this is 2010, I was still pretty much in that camp. I had kind of dealt with some of the New World Order type stuff and the conspiracy stuff, and had heard of it and kind of touched on it, but I hadn't broken the conditioning. I'd broken a lot of the early conditioning, about this sort of the woke, normie, whatever group you want to put people in, normies, politically aware, and then truth or conspiracies. So what I want to do is I want to go through an article that I wrote and way back, probably in 2010. But and even though it's got a lot of some of that left right, it nails what we're dealing with today. It absolutely nails it, and this is something that I think people need to. Not enough people understand the battle. Okay, so it's a cultural battle. We're fighting good versus evil, and part of the battle here at home in America is we're fighting to preserve our culture, right? And we've got this, in this article, I refer to it as sort of the progressive liberal, talking point sort of agenda. And it's really, as I evolved, politically with all of that, I now understand, well, they're just the puppets. They're just the talking heads. This is the globalist agenda. This is the New World Order, 1984, break everybody down and destroy humanity agenda. But at the heart of saving America is trying to save our culture. And when you listen to sort of the mainstream conversation out there, all we get bullhorned every day is the value system that they want us to embrace. And that is the progressive value system of tolerance and equity and inclusion and diversity and all of that claptrap Marxist just BS that has been sort of this invented set of ideals that has really burst into the center of the conversation in the last 20, 30 years. And what has really hit me is, we're fighting and arguing over a lot of that. And all of those concepts really, if we're supposed to embrace all of those concepts, well, what are we replacing? And I don't know if there's enough of a recognition or understanding of what we're replacing as people sort of fall into the mind control of these new concepts. And basically what these are intended to do is to create a new set of cultural norms. And they've been largely successful in it. Okay, so if it's a new set of cultural norms, what was there before? And that's the point. And what was there before was the American culture. And more specifically, when they started this maniacal process many decades ago, that culture was largely traditional, faith-based, 10 Commandments, strong families, all of that. Coming out of World War II into the 50s, that was American culture, and it was thriving. And it was very powerful and strong. And this sort of Marxist, globalist, kill everybody agenda, they knew they had to break that down. And they knew it wouldn't happen overnight. So that's where, I think, was it last episode, maybe episode before that, or I think episode before, where I get into the, all this Marxist ideology, the cultural Marxism that came here. It started in the Frankfurt School over in Germany, in the 30s, and then they got kicked out of Germany before World War II. Hitler took power because it was such a communist-centered ideology, and Germany was being overrun at the time. So they come to the U.S., they settle in Columbia, and they've been chipping away ever since. And they've made great strides. So let's jump into this because it's what I present here is sort of the yin and the yang, the either or the or. If you want one, you can't have the other. These things are mutually exclusive, and you don't hear anybody talking about traditional culture that's trying to push this sort of mainstream narrative. What you see, and I've seen it, maybe you've seen it on videos, where you have just these stupid, mind-controlled, zombified college students screaming at white people, and they're often white people doing the screaming, that there is no American culture. You're white, you have no culture. And that's what they've been indoctrinated into. And it's just not true. It's just not true. You know it, I know it. And what they're doing is they're not saying, we're destroying traditional culture, because if they said that, we'd fight against that. They're just laying down a new culture on top of what existed before and telling you yours doesn't exist. Well, it does exist. It did exist. And that's the heart of the battle right now, is some of this cultural battle. And so I break it down here, I think, in a pretty good format that really lays out the framework of where the battle is, and can, I think, help, if we spread this forward, help that conversation when somebody comes at you with these progressive cultural values and ideals. You have a response, and you probably already do, but here is a response that I've created to say, no, stop right there. I've got my values right here. It's traditional American culture. That's what made this country what it was, what made it so strong and powerful, and I'm not going to let you override it, overrun it, and destroy it with whatever that Marxist claptrap BS that you're peddling. All right, so let's dive in. This is, let's see, it's a few pages, but let's see how it goes. Let's see if I can skip through some of it. All right, so and there's a couple things here. Like I said, they're mutually exclusive, and there's one versus the other. So you have traditional culture and assimilation; those are tied together, and versus liberal progressive culture and multiculturalism. Recognize those words? That's what they're cramming down our throat. Okay, and so what basically this lays out is the difference between the two and how they're trying to erase one while implementing the other. And we just can't fall for it. We've been falling for it for decades. Just got to push back, keep pushing back. All right. So it's difficult best to describe American culture. It's not homogeneous, having many elements, layers, complexity. It represents that set of values, traits, behaviors, and ways of living that have accumulated in this country since its inception up through the present. So you got to, also keep in mind there's a historical perspective here, because we didn't just arrive at that point. Let's say it was by the late 50s, early 60s, where American culture was at its peak. We didn't just arrive there. It was hard fought for a couple hundred years. I mean, it wasn't just born with the revolution in 1776. Those people, those cultures, they'd been in America before then, the 13 colonies, they had families, they had tight control over education, they were self-reliant, they were independent. That's what American culture was born out of, all right? All right, so, however, it's possible to divide American culture into two basic sets of cultural values, norms, etc., that have evolved in America over the last 200 plus years. The first is traditional American culture, and the second, liberal progressive American culture. And really, when I say liberal progressive, that's what I meant back then, but this is really the globalist agenda. This is, the Democrats are just the forward battering ram of this insane culture. And how I describe it is, so you've got, the two-party system, you've got the Democrats are basically the front action, the knocking down the doors, kicking in the doors, spears forward, coming at us every day with this crap. The Republican Party, honestly, is just the rear guard action. They're never going to do anything that they say that they stand for. Okay, if you haven't figured that out, hopefully you're figuring it out. Their job is to just keep us at bay enough to allow them to continue to march through our culture and destroy it, okay? They're the rear guard action. They're keeping us from full-on revolt because they're just throwing us a little red meat, just throwing us just enough to say, okay, all right, I guess you're fighting for me, all right? Well, they're not. They're not. It's the people that are in power are not going to change any of this, all right? And everybody needs to understand that. I watched some of the CPAC stuff recently, and I and it wasn't any of the big names. Well, let's see, there was Mark Levin was one of the big names, and I just I was bored by it. It was just a bunch of talking points over and over again. I've been hearing the same crap since I started paying attention to this stuff and watching things like that, and over 15 years. They get up every year. They get up there. They say all the same stuff. What's changed? What's changed? Nothing. We're marching to the road to hell. And the Republicans are not going to stop it. So anyway, not to get off on that. All right. So yeah, liberal progressive American culture, that's the demons. It's just diabolical. All right. Additionally, since much of this country is comprised of immigrants, there are two separate and very different cultural values that have had considerable influence on American culture throughout history. And the impact of these two related values is the deciding factor in determining how healthy our American culture is. This is this is it right here. The impact of these two values determine how healthy our culture is. All right. The first overriding value that helps solidify much of American culture through most of its history is the value of assimilation. The second overriding value, and one that is the opposite of assimilation, has been thrust upon our culture in the last few decades at great expense, is multiculturalism. Again, mutually exclusive. Traditional versus liberal progressive, mutually exclusive. Assimilation versus multiculturalism, mutually exclusive. You have one or the other. All right. Traditional American culture owes much of its success from generation to generation to the value of assimilation. And correspondingly, much of the cultural breakdown we've witnessed recently is in part attributable to the liberal progressive value of multiculturalism. Divide, divide, divide. Anyway, we'll get into more of it. Okay? Let me just read through it. So I could go on for quite a while on any one of these statements. All right? If you haven't figured that out by now. Traditional American culture. This country was founded and built around very basic and specific values, ideals, and behaviors. First and foremost is this country's cultural connection to Judeo-Christian values. Early American culture has its roots in biblical principles. I mean, they left, if you believe the early stories of why, the settlers left Europe, and some of it was religious persecution. They wanted freedom to study and believe in the God of their choosing, not to have a religion or non-religion pushed down their throats, right? All right, we have derived not only our God-given rights as written in the United States Constitution from biblical principles, but that unique set of values and behaviors that largely determine how we act, interact, and live with one another. It's the bedrock of our culture. 10 Commandments. Biblical principles lay out the basic rules that we have historically followed within our culture. They define how we interact within our families, our businesses, our communities, our politics, and so on. It is an all-inclusive set of principles that largely determine the quality of not only each individual life, but the overall happiness, prosperity, and general well-being of entire communities and the nation. They see from the most granular, individual, family, community, nation, ties it all together. That was America. I mean, it wasn't perfect, it wasn't 100%, but largely speaking, that was America. Traditional values can be found in our school systems as each generation attempted to pass on not only intellectual knowledge, but behavioral and cultural knowledge as well. From early in our history, when actual scripture was used to help impart particular lessons or values, to current educational policy that has stripped all biblical references out of the educational process. Okay? Mutually exclusive. Can't have them both. They got to get it out. They got to get God out. Well, they've done it. I mean, almost completely. The process of maintaining this basic set of rules, values, or ideals that gets handed down from generation to generation is critical to the long-term continuity of any culture or nation. And this one right here, and it started with the 60s. The 60s was really, at least in my historical research and understanding, and it may have gone back before then, and there was some of that in the 50s, but the 60s is really the first generation. It was the early young, was it the boomers? When they, became adults in the 60s, that thought that they had all the right answers. That all the old ways were outdated and old-fashioned. That's where that started, and that's how you break tradition. You break handing down that strong culture from generation to generation by introducing something new, something toxic and poisonous, imparting it into the youth, and then they carry it forward, and you've lost your history. And that's what's happened. Okay, this country was founded on strong traditional principles that in the early years helped it navigate through the difficulties that any new culture or society must confront and become the common threads that held towns, cities, and states together as one nation. It was the common culture that held this country together as it grew from a handful of colonies along the northeast coastline to a 50-state republic of states that spread from sea to shining sea and beyond. With each generation, these core cultural principles were handed down by stories, through education system, television, books, and music. And who controls all that now? Slow march through the institutions. Cultural Marxists, man, got to hand it to them. They did it. They own it. It's all theirs. We are a product of the culture that we see and hear around us each day, for better or worse. And our culture is influenced by those ideas, actions, and deeds that are exchanged between its citizens. Our culture evolves sometimes by nature and at times by force of will. But either way, this evolutionary process is not an accident and therefore should be taken seriously. The forces of good and evil that add to or challenge the basic principles of traditional culture should be something that we do not necessarily leave to chance wherever possible. And that is what we've done. If the basic foundations of traditional American culture are to be maintained, it will take a conscious effort diligently applied at every level or layer of influence. To the extent this isn't happening, other forces are exerting influence over each generation, and those elements are helping to shape a new version of American culture, a liberal, progressive American culture. Is this ringing true? You seeing the historical parallels and context? All right, so let's talk a little bit about liberal, progressive American culture. When and where the liberal progressive elements began to exert enough influence to drastically direct American culture is open to debate. But the fact it has occurred is not. Liberal culture also has a basic set of values, traits, or beliefs that define our behavior and relationships from family to friends and outward to community and state. These cultural elements are not derived from biblical principles and are more centered on the individual and their own right or permission to experience and express the full range of human behavior with little or no regard culture, community, or state. Morality is relative. There is no right or wrong, and if it feels good, do it. So those are just, kind of the surface level talking points. What this represents really at its source. I mean, it's do what thou wilt. It's the first rule of Satan. And if you read into all of that and the names of all the writings and all of that, Aleister Crowley and all that, and Hollywood, what they've become, do what thou wilt. But they packaged it really cleverly with propaganda in the 60s and 70s and made it, empowered people to act in that way without even knowing. they were adopting satanic principles that was becoming the new cultural norm. All right. Liberal culture has been evolving in America for decades, but its explosion into mainstream America can be traced back to the 60s. This is the generation that rejected the generations that came before them, rejected their parents' long-held cultural values, and declared that they had the right answers, new answers, and would therefore no longer comply with previous traditional cultural norms. Somehow, everything that had come before them, everything that their parents believed in, fought for, and died for, was deeply flawed and incorrect. This ideology of self-centered egoism burst onto the scene on college campuses across the country, became pop culture, and began indoctrinating a new generation of Americans into an ideology of liberalism that stood in direct opposition to our history and traditional American culture. This previously fringe counterculture has evolved and become the mainstream culture of today. Our public education system, the media and entertainment industry can be credited with its startling success. In one generation, this nation has been transformed from one of a traditional faith-based culture to a liberal, progressive, anything-goes culture. Like the old saying goes, prove me wrong. And it's self-evident. All I have to do is walk out, live and breathe. Turn on the TV, the radio, sports, news, any of it. It's the new culture. All right, so let's talk multiculturalism versus assimilation. The invention of the idea of multiculturalism, that was completely fake. I couldn't believe when I first heard it, like in the 90s or whatever. I was like, what? Multicultural? What's that? That's ridiculous. I rejected it offhand immediately, even before I had been, more of the awakening that has led me to where I am today. All right, born out of the pathology of liberalism, has been introduced into the framework of American culture in the last 20 years or so. Okay, so this was written in 2010, so yeah, it goes back to the 90s. The idea is that America is a nation of many different cultures, not just one American culture. As a result of recognizing all of the many cultures that America supposedly is, our true historical American culture, the one that held this country together through world wars and violent expansion of its borders, firmly rooted in the Word of God, is slowly being eliminated. Through the liberal progressive lie of American multiculturalism, our true and historic traditional American culture is being erased. And that's really, this is really the key point of this video. Our culture's being erased. And that's what made America, America. And so when you see Trump make America great again and all of that, that's really at the heart of what he's saying. And I don't know if he's going far enough, but he certainly did a lot more than any previous president to at least acknowledge that this is happening. And we've got to understand that. We were handed a strong, healthy, vibrant culture. And to the extent we have not fought and protected that, we got to look at that. This is not just a political battle. This is a battle for hearts and minds. This is a cultural battle. And the underpinning of that cultural battle is really the battle of good versus evil. Because really, if you look at traditional culture, it stands for good. Rules-based society, Christian, Ten Commandments, morality, right and wrong. That's good. And the evil is do what thou wilt. Anything goes. That's Satan. That's the left-hand path. So that's the heart of the battle. And we fight it through fighting to protect our culture. So we've got to stand up for our culture every chance we get. And we've got to soundly reject, pretty much everything that's coming out of what is now today the mainstream culture. It's this toxic pop culture garbage that's destroying, really, like 1984, the statement, really destroying human minds and putting them together in their own choosing. That's what this crap is doing. It's absolutely disgusting that I to have watched it over the decades that I have watched it, of my life. It's just painful to watch. So I would certainly like to do more about it. And hopefully, at some point we'll be able to. And doing things like this video is just my way. And if you resonate with it and you spread it, I'll put the link to this in the video description. And we just gotta fire everything. Every day, every chance we get, every conversation we have. We've got to try to see where people are and help nudge them, away from some of this evil that's being rammed down our throats. All right, so traditional American culture is being erased. may be possible for the cultures embraced by multiculturalism to exist within a framework of a traditional culture, but that doesn't seem to be the intent of this liberal, progressive, globalist, New World Order construct. The continued and pervasive focus on the many cultures seems to come at the expense of the one culture, an ideal that is the exact opposite of what the real history of America is. Multiculturalism allows for immigrants to come from around the world and impose the culture from their homeland onto their new world and surrounding people and environment. They are allowed to gain all the benefits of being in America without having to embrace the historic culture of America. They are no longer being asked to assimilate and instead are encouraged, the left, encouraged, right, to promote their flag, their culture, right? The culture of their homeland. We now celebrate diversity rather than celebrate what makes us all American. And this celebrate diversity, it's just crap. It's just crap. It's toxic, just crap. There's no basis in history that any of this garbage they're peddling makes strong cultures and societies. There's no evidence. It's completely invented garbage to destroy us. And they're trying to tell us that's American culture. I don't think so. America became one nation under God with the help of two major influences. First, it was founded on the Judeo-Christian principles, and those became the guiding forces of its people and culture. Second, the one-way ticket into America, no matter where a new immigrant was from, was through assimilation. People flocked to America from around the world to embrace not only America, the land, but American culture and traditions. They became Americans, not Asian Americans, Mexican Americans, Muslim Americans, as is happening now. They threw off their old culture and embraced their new one. And also, back then, American culture, it was self-evident that it was strong and was the right answer for humanity. And asking people to embrace what American culture has become, I mean, look at it. It's toxic, pop culture, satanic garbage. I'm ashamed and embarrassed of what American culture has become. And we're asking people to come from other countries. I've talked to people that have migrated here in the last 5-10 years. And I'm hearing people say that, it's not what they thought it was going to be. And they're kind of disappointed. They're thinking about going back home because it's not what it once was. And I get it. And when I have those conversations, it's like, yeah, we're not what we used to be. And, hopefully we can get that back. But, celebrating, diversity and all of that just is not going to get it done. Threw off their old culture and embraced their new one and became American. And so again, the whole hyphenated American, then started, the left introduced that, 60s, 70s, whatever. It's just everything they do is to destroy. Okay, assimilation into traditional American culture created one nation, one people. That created strength, bonds, unity. It is human nature to be attracted to sameness, just as we choose our friends primarily based on those things that we held in common. It is not bigotry, racism, hatred, fear-mongering, phobia, or any of the multitude of accusations from the left that are hurled when someone from traditional American culture speaks up for and defends their culture in opposition of any other culture that is attempting to impose itself onto American culture. The intended outcome and desire of multiculturalism is to destroy traditional American culture and replace it with a mixed bag of cultures from around the world and call that the American culture. To create as many subgroups within America and pit them against each other for the sake of maintaining power over them. This is the modern political left in action to devastating consequence. And again, I frame it left-right. We all know, right? It's the agenda. And the left is the evil. They love it. They can't get enough of this demonic garbage. All right, assimilation created one, we're almost done here. Assimilation created one place for people of all walks of life to come together and be truly equal with freedom and opportunity based on nothing more than mere presence. That's why everybody wanted to come here, folks. Just all you had to do was show up, embrace American culture and values, and the world was your oyster. Not anymore. There was no ethnic requirement, no social requirement, no preconceived notion of who can or cannot pursue the American dream, something never before achieved in human existence. The greatness of this country is a direct reflection of the degree of assimilation that occurred during the majority of the history of this country. Man. Multiculturalism has created the exact opposite, and it is unfortunately by design. Multiculturalism divides people into separate groups or segments. Walls appear where there were once bridges. Our only common value now is the one of tolerance as preached by the liberal progressives. This is not a very strong value or ideal to bond a nation together with. We are told we must be tolerant of each other's differences rather than come together by the mutual embrace of that which we hold in common. We share the same space but live in very different worlds of different customs, values, ideals, and language, all held together through tolerance. And who sits at the top of all that, right? It's just Hegelian dialectic. It's divide and conquer. Divide. The more they can break us down. And one of the things I'll get into, not in this episode, but one of the ways that helped them accomplish this, I don't hear anybody talking about it, as a matter of fact. I bring it up from time to time, is go back and read the history and read the details. That's where most people just don't. Maybe I'm weird. I'll read this stuff. I want to know how the hell we got here. But you read the Immigration Act in 1965, and maybe I'll post a link to that. That's where all this started, so that they could bring in as many people from as many different sort of other-oriented, third world, different cultures, values, lesser advanced countries as possible. And before that act, the migrants into America were mostly from kind of similar, more developed countries around the world, right? And so that's what really laid the foundation. And I've often spoke about, repealing the 1965 Immigration Act. I've never heard a politician say that. I think maybe Ann Coulter once mentioned something 15 years ago, 10, 12, 15 years ago. I don't know. But it's really at the heart of a lot of this. And I got nothing against anybody from anywhere around the world. But if you're not culturally advanced enough to assimilate into American culture, as you're seeing, happening more and more, especially with what's coming through the borders today, it's just these third world countries are just not as advanced. And it's just, it's not a judgment. It's just a reality. And I always thought that we could promote and spread our version of healthy culture into some of these other third world nations and help them, get better education, develop infrastructure, create, capacity and jobs and economic abundance. We could spread that around the whole world if the people at the top were more benevolent and didn't just want to control it. See, that's the problem. That's why they're not. And so now they're just going to import them all here and help bring the country down. So anyway, all right. So we are falsely told these differences are what make us a great nation. That is a lie. Our differences will eventually destroy us. That's true. As history has shown, as past multicultural nations have attempted to tolerate each other within the borders of a single shared nation. We are a world of separate nations for a reason. Within the safety of each nation's borders, there is a common culture that provides the bonds of unity that allow for strength and longevity. Absent this, destruction follows. And that, I think of the earlier passage, I said it wasn't, I forget how I said it about being, racist, and it wasn't all these things if you maybe don't want to embrace something that's not like you. And that doesn't mean skin color. It's common cultural values, but they use skin color as a way to bludgeon you and call you a racist for disagreeing. And that reminds me of that comment that Obama said back when he was president, and it was probably during the 2012 election. And he says, and he was criticizing, the Bible thumping, white people, right? We're just these horrible people. He says, they fear you. They fear the other. And that's an outdated, blah, blah, blah. Basically, he was demonizing the fact that we have natural, and some of it's tribal, and some of it Western civilization has helped us advance beyond some of the most basic tribal reactions that we had that kept us warring with each other just because we didn't look the same or whatever. No, those are all superficial differences. Saying you embrace American culture. Let's come together based on what makes us the same. And the only thing the left and this globalist agenda has to offer is tolerance of our diversity. And we're supposed to celebrate that. I don't know who we're celebrating it with, but it's just, it makes no sense, right? So anyway, that statement by Obama was a way to demonize some of our natural instincts. It's my natural instinct to be suspicious of things that maybe don't quite fit exactly what I think, fits into my world, which is a world of, safety, security, right and wrong, protection, fairness, goodwill. That's my world. If I suspect that you may not embrace that and you may have some ulterior motive, yeah, I'm going to be suspicious. I'm going to be a little guarded. I might hold you kind of at arm's length until I'm sure that we're all on the same team here. That's natural. That's instinctive, but they don't want you to have that instinct. They're circumventing all of our natural instincts, breaking us from our history and our lineage so they can control us and just create this two-dimensional, dumbed down, just unbelievably stunted version of humanity. And we just can't let it. We got to fight back. And traditional culture is a force of good that we can push back with. All right? We've got to get those back into our mainstream culture. And the churches aren't doing enough for that. And that's a whole nother episode we could talk about. But it's really about restoring traditional culture. So let's get the last comment here. America has never been a nation whose culture is an amalgamation of different cultures from around the world. No. America has its own unique culture, a culture that is being attacked every day by the forces of the liberal, progressive, globalist agenda that seeks to destroy our traditional faith-based culture and put in its place a godless culture driven by the full range of imperfections of the human condition for the sake of power and control. And that's an interesting statement there, full range of imperfections of the human condition. And that's really the satanic stuff. Yeah. You can be evil. Those are all the imperfections. And that's one of my, I published, I'll put a link to it. I published a book, an ebook with all of my, or a lot of my posts. And one of my blog posts I mentioned that they're breaking down, what made us strong and healthy, and it was law and order and all that. And I said, when you pull away all of those basic fundamentals of right and wrong and the way we deal with each other, what you're left with is jungle law, and we're left to tear each other apart for power and control. That's it. And that's where they're taking us. And so that's kind of what I was alluding to here, the imperfections of the human condition for the sake of power and control. Let's do what thou wilt. That's Satan. We stand for good. We stand for God. We stand for principles. All right? So anyway, hope you got something out of that. Like I said, I'll put the link to it. It's a culture war, which is a spiritual war. So it's not just political. So let's keep that on our hearts every day as we go out there and, we're confronted with this stuff on a daily basis. It's just absolutely insane what we're dealing with. But a lot of it is because a lot of this traditional cultural stuff has been pushed. I've also written that, the old traditional culture is now, and you see that all over the place. I'm not the only person to see this. It's been written about a lot and talked about a lot in the last few years, especially. But I wrote about it, years back when I started this blog. We are the new counterculture. Traditional culture is the new counterculture. So we're the rebels. and you got, the woke little college dude, supporting all the usual causes that thinks he's the rebel. And it's just, that's what we're up against. And, a lot of these people are not very articulate. They're not very educated in this stuff. They're walking around and regurgitating talking points, and they're full of rage and anger if you try to challenge them. So a lot of them you don't even need to, but just stand in your own principles, stand in your own values. Do not let them take that from you. Do not buy into all this garbage, all this Marxist garbage. We have to reject it soundly at every opportunity. All right? So that's it for today. I'll see you on the next one. All right? Later.